Now, you're the co-founder and chief executive of Hong Kong Watch. What's been happening with your organization since the national security law? How have things changed?
Well, I think the key thing that has changed is that, as I said earlier, we used to be in daily contact with people in Hong Kong, and now we're hardly in touch with anyone on the ground. I think the other thing that has changed, of course, is that a number of the people we were in touch with in Hong Kong have left Hong Kong. So we are still in touch with them, but in a different context. So people like the former legislator Ted Hui, Nathan Law, and other lesser-known activists have left the city and are trying to do what they can in exile. So those are probably the two big changes. And I think perhaps the third change is that rather late in the day, the international community and particularly the UK has reacted and has woken up and has done more than it was doing before. So, for example, the UK's British National Overseas Programme, where potentially 3 million BNO status holders from Hong Kong and their dependents, so potentially up to 5 million Hong Kongers are eligible to come to the UK. And we're not going to see that kind of number coming, but we're certainly seeing thousands of people already taking up the offer. My view is that was a very welcome and quite courageous step by the UK, but it was pretty late in the day. And if the UK had taken a stronger line earlier on, maybe we wouldn't have ended up in the position we're in.
Yeah, it seems to me like with all the Hong Kongers in exile, it's becoming kind of similar to the Tibetan movement.
Yes, I think that's true. And one of the perhaps encouraging developments and a sign of just how bad things have got is that increasingly different groups who face the CCP's repression are forming alliances. So you see more and more Hong Kongers and Tibetans and Uyghurs and Falun Gong practitioners together at demonstrations outside Chinese embassies or outside parliaments. And that's a good thing.
Yeah. It's funny, Shelley, what were you telling me earlier today about like Falun Gong being sort of like a metric in Hong Kong?
Oh, yeah. Right after the national security, like in the first couple months after the national security law was put in place, I saw somebody tweeting, just like a regular Hong Konger, you know, one of them who hadn't already left Twitter in fear that what they could say would get them in trouble, was saying that honestly, seeing the Falun Gong banners on the streets in Hong Kong had become his kind of litmus test for whether or not it was time to get out of Hong Kong. That like if he saw that like Falun Gong banners were gone, that they were going underground or banned, that he was like, this is it, like this is time to leave. Because, you know, Falun Gong has been allowed in Hong Kong even after they were no longer allowed in mainland China. So, you know, these are the kind of things, or, you know, Apple Daily was probably a metric for some people. Like how do you see what's the canary in the coal mine?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I can see that. And I mean, it's very concerning that in recent weeks we have seen more pressure on Falun Gong in Hong Kong. I think there was an Epoch Times journalist who was attacked physically. The printers that were also physically attacked. So that's definitely something to watch in the weeks and months ahead.
Do you think we're going to see a bigger Hong Kong exile movement now than perhaps we had been seeing over the last year?
I think so. I mean, I think that, and what I think we've seen over the last year is primarily those who needed to get out fast, getting out. So those who were in or felt themselves to be in immediate danger. What I think we'll see going forward is ordinary Hong Kongers who perhaps were not politically active, but feeling that they don't want their kids to be going to school and being indoctrinated by the CCP. They don't want to spend their days reading China Daily or Xinhua instead of Apple Daily. and that sort of thing. People whose way of life has now changed as freedoms have been dismantled and as it becomes more and more a CCP-controlled city. I think we'll see those sort of people, and I mean we'll have to see how business and the financial sector is affected, but the pressure on banks to freeze people's the assets of political activists is one sign of the financial coercion in the city. So yeah, I think we will see more people leaving who didn't have to get out quickly, but who will start to make preparations to get out. Of course, there is concern that the Hong Kong government has introduced or is introducing legislation that will tighten controls on exit, a new immigration bill that takes effect in August that gives them the power to stop people leaving the city. And we'll have to see how they deploy that power, but that's certainly causing concern. So we may see quite a significant number of people trying to get out between now and August.
Hong Kong's becoming a prison.
I mean, I was going to say serious East Germany vibes.
Yeah.
Yeah, if they actually are able to stop people from leaving. I mean, I know that U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has said, the U.S. should make it easier for people to come for Hong Kong, like Hong Kong refugees, and you mentioned, Benedict, the UK program. What I kind of wonder is whether Western governments will kind of see this as enough. Like, if we let people come from Hong Kong exiles,
assuming they can get out.
Yeah, like that. This is our role, and there's nothing else we can do. Like, the most that we can do is kind of give them a place to flee to.
Yeah, that's definitely a real danger. And that's one of my messages in our advocacy to the British government in particular, to say what you've done on the BNO scheme is fantastic and should be applauded, but it shouldn't let the government off the hook in terms of looking at what else it can do. And it doesn't, of course, solve the situation for the people of Hong Kong. It gives those who want it a lifeline out of the city. But for those who either choose to stay in the city or for whatever reason just can't leave, it doesn't change their situation. So I'm definitely encouraging other governments to help, and particularly for those who are born after 1997 who aren't eligible for the BNO scheme, many of whom are the young frontline protesters who are most vulnerable and who will be feeling that they don't have a future in Hong Kong. We should be providing a lifeline to them, but at the same time, we should be looking at every other possible action we can take to put pressure on the CCP for what it's done. At least, even if we can't stop the repression in the short to medium term, we should make the CCP pay as high a possible a price for what they've done. Because if we don't, and if we allow them to get away with what they've done, we can be sure they're not going to stop with Hong Kong. Taiwan is already in their sights, and they'll be emboldened to go further with Taiwan if they think there are no costs for what they've done to Hong Kong.
I think that also kind of ties into the coronavirus too. If they get away with that, what can they get away with?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, is there anything that the UK or US governments could do if they had the political willpower to actually turn back the tide of the national security law and the encroachment of freedoms in Hong Kong? Is that even possible?
I think it's difficult to see that in the short to medium term. But what I think could be done is to, through targeted sanctions, both on individual officials and on enterprises that are close to the CCP, that are complicit with, for example, the surveillance state, enterprises that are of strategic value to the CCP. If we had sanctions on those entities and individuals, it would start to make some people within the CCP question the direction that they're going in and the direction that Xi Jinping is taking them in. If they start to feel their personal finances are affected, their ability to travel is affected, their ability to send their kids to universities and schools overseas is impacted, then that may result in some pressure for change within the CCP, maybe even one day the fall of the CCP, which is what I think we would all like to see. But at least the emboldening of more moderate, for want of a better word, people in the CCP who might then force a change of direction. That's difficult to achieve, but I think not impossible in the medium term.
What I think is really interesting about the fact that they, said that Apple Daily's crime, quote unquote, was talking about sanctions or asking foreign governments to inflict sanctions on Hong Kong and China is it really shows how scared the Chinese Communist Party is of sanctions. And I think it's pretty clear because they've also they're moving in the direction of trying to do things like the digital yuan or trying to form something that's like an alternative to the SWIFT banking system that is essentially, under U.S. control in a certain way because it runs on the U.S. dollar. So anybody who gets sanctioned cannot use the SWIFT system anymore, which all of the international banks use. So there are a lot of ways in which sanctions really kind of cut at the core of the Communist Party's fear, which is that they'll be cut off from the money supply, like the Western money supply. So I think it's really important that while we can still sanction them, that the governments do it. And that's something that, like you said earlier, Benedict, it has a real impact. And I think it's not just hoping that, there would be some kind of like internal change within the Communist Party, like that, Communist Party members would necessarily, say, we're not going to Xi Jinping, like, whoa, we can't do these policies. What might happen is that there's just a certain level of disobedience. And we've seen this with things that have happened inside China. For example, with Falun Gong, they've had some campaigns where they've run to call the officials who are in charge of police stations or local detention centers, get people to call from abroad and kind of tell them that, people know what they're doing. They know they're torturing people and things like that. And in some cases, like the local, head of this police center or whatever will back off because they're afraid. So they're not going to be able to officially say, I'm not going to, follow this policy, but they might quietly release all the Falun Gong practitioners they have in prison.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.